Okay. So you saw this before. We talked about this iconic. Well, you talked about you didn't hear me, but or you didn't see me. But this is obviously the Macy's in downtown New York, probably the most iconic department store in the country. And the screen on the left here is, or the picture on the left is how Americans shopped in the 1930s and 40s, where you see that the pedestrian is king on the streets in whatever downtown this was. I think this was New York. And if you look to the right, all of a sudden the automobile became king and the pedestrian went to the sidewalk. And that is symbolic for what happened in America. Roads became king in the 1950s and into the 1960s. People left the cities and we built these, 3,000 of these. And they were based on the model that was prominent in downtown in that time, which was the full line department store model with specialty shops all around them. And that's essentially what they built in the suburbs. They simply built them around where the roads converge and where you had the largest populations accessible. And as you can see, they're not particularly pretty buildings, but they were very functional buildings. And the model was put the department stores on the ends. If you have more than two, put one or two more in the middle, and you create a walking environment. And it became the social and the cultural center of the 1960s and 70s in the United States. And something ended that. And what ended that, and why I understood that there was a problem with malls in the early 2000s, was because of this. What killed that was commodity retail. And we built literally 3 to 4 billion square feet of this between 1985 and 2005. And each of these commodity retailers represents a former department in a department store. So as they were built, they took market share from the department stores. And this is what happened. Department stores rapidly lost market share, and value or big box retailers rapidly gained market share. By 2007, you can see on the left, the department stores are the bright colors on the left. By 2016, the market capitalization of the big box stores soared, and the market capitalization of the department stores fell. The volume had gone from 85 billion to 75 billion, but that wasn't the end. By last year, department store volumes were down to only 57 million. And that's all department stores in the United States. And let's put that into perspective. Here are the volumes, annual volumes of some of our better known box retailers. But let's just take Costco, for example. All department stores combined for less than half the volume of Costco, one chain. And Costco's house brand, Kirkland, which sells $30 billion a year in goods, sold more than half of the total department store volume. It's pretty amazing numbers. So in January this year, Green Street Advisors caught up to what I was suggesting back in 2003, and they announced that 50% of the remaining department stores would close. If you look at the very top of the screen, you're going to see their words from January when they said 50% of all mall-based department stores would close over the next 5 years. By April, a month after the pandemic shut down America, they accelerated that prediction to 50% closing by the end of 2021. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with a new system of retail in America, and the mall is not centric to it. We have a commodity specialty dichotomy, and 85 to 90% of all retail in the United States is what I call commodity retail, based on primary needs. And here is the way that works. Left to right, convenience. We trade convenience for price. The better the convenience, the higher the price. If you look all the way to the right, there's Costco at the right, the least convenient, but the best unit price in retail. Amazon's on both sides of that, but we're not going to cover that today. That leaves specialty retailing, what we commonly thought of as the malls in the old days, with many different ways of delivery today. And the traditional malls are still one of the ways, but only one of the ways. Most specialty retail will be delivered on high streets and in themed centers and open air specialty centers, and even in outlet centers. So where does that leave the mall industry? Before the pandemic, it left the mall industry with the top 20 mall owners listed on the right, and the largest owner being Brookfield, only owning 152 malls. Look to the right there. I'm sorry, left earlier. Look to the right, and this is the percentage of retail real estate controlled by REITs. And look at that, 80% of malls are owned by REITs. We're going to come back to that in just a couple minutes. Real quick look at e-commerce, because so many people think that e-commerce is what is responsible for the demise of the mall. And e-commerce has almost nothing to do with the demise of the mall. I'm going to show you why. So there's the annual sales of all goods and services in the United States as of the end of last year, 5.35 trillion with a T. The growth rate of retail averaging 4.5% a year, going all the way back to the early 1990s. And pretty much as far as you can see, that one dip there is the Great Recession. We're going to see another dip like that when this graph gets extended to include the pandemic and the recession that followed it. And here are the statistics on e-commerce as of the beginning of this year. And as you can see, e-commerce only represented 10.7% of retail. That is almost exactly where catalog retailing topped out in the mid-1990s. So all the hoopla about Amazon, and yet all we've really done is transferred catalog retailing to the internet. And for those of you who remember back far enough, you remember the big thick Sears catalogs and JCPenney catalogs, Montgomery Ward, Spiegel. Those were the internet of our childhood. Look to the right. The growth rate of internet sales is dropping, and there is another slide that I don't have here, but actually before the pandemic, eMarketer had the growth going down to 10% and below in the coming years. But look on this chart here, look to the right. That represents the growth of retail, just that very far right, the blue stick going up. That represents the growth of internet during the pandemic. And as you can see, it spiked up to about 15.1% of U.S. retail sales. If you were to walk down the street and ask most people what percent it really was, they would tell you it's probably 60 to 80%. And the reason for that is because so many places in the United States that are not urban use the internet very little. They use dollar stores, though. There are 35,000 dollar stores in the United States. And there's Amazon. This is 2017 numbers, but Amazon at that point, depending on how you counted their retail, whether it included third-party sales or not, was somewhere between 0.75% and 1.75%. I like to say it's about 1%. Only 1%. The average American thinks it's 50 to 60%. And then there again is the comparison to other retail with Amazon, the 98 being what we think they're selling versus third parties selling on their site, being very small, but larger than all department stores combined. And apparel. Apparel is the largest category on the internet. It's 34.5%, and yet it's also the fastest growing brick and mortar. But it's the fastest growing brick and mortar non-food only in strip center real estate. So you see the TJX Concepts, Ross, Burlington. By the way, Ross and Burlington sell 75% or more of their goods on cash transactions. And what does that leave us in the real estate industry in general, and malls specifically? So here's the growth curve in square footage for malls, which peaked in the mid to late 1980s and then headed steadily down to almost zero today. Look what happened as we built the strip centers, and strip centers skyrocketed to over 150 million square feet a year. That's leveled off now as that's become a mature industry. We have growth in other retail now, mostly mixed use. And then when you put it all together, where does it leave us? It leaves us with malls at the very bottom with no construction. It leaves us with the total being well below what the total was at the height of retail construction. That's why you brokers out there are seeing so many less transactions now. And when you put it all together, that's what retail construction looks like in the United States. So if you've been in this business from 1960 to 2010, you saw that steadily upward curve. And all of a sudden, it feels like it went off a cliff, because it did. And it's not coming back anytime soon, because there is no replacement in the near-term future for the type of real estate we're using right now. In fact, there's going to be contraction. So here we go. What is responsible for all this change besides the demise of the department store? Well, let's start with the demise of the department store. We talked about that. And look at this. Retail bankruptcy skyrocketing. Retail bankruptcy skyrocketing as a result of the demise of the department store. Commodity retail, that's the stuff you see on the street. That is here to stay, but the growth rate is way down. And all of that means less retail square footage. We think retail square footage will drop from 8.5 billion total square footage to as much as 5 billion. This is a more aggressive prediction than others, but I believe that it's probably accurate with 2.5%, 2.5 billion coming from the strip center and another close to a billion. That's probably just a tad high now, but another close to a billion as the beginning of this year coming from the mall sector. Fashion. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on fashion, but I just want to say the lowering of prices and the quickening of the design cycle has killed full price, high low, two-season fashion retailers, which is basically what's in malls. And now back to the REITs and CMBS mortgage discussion, which I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. Take a look at this. On the right, this is pre-pandemic. Look at the default rate, retail being the dark purple, the second bubble from the top on the right. And that has skyrocketed since. Only hotels were higher. And that is going to explode in the coming months and years. We're going to see the collision of that REIT structure, which demands funds from operation, with the CMBS mortgage structure, which demands paying your mortgage. And as a result, you're going to see landlord after landlord sending malls into special servicing and out of their productive life. And that leads us now to the future of malls. I believe that probably 80% of the remaining malls in the United States are going to collapse in the coming probably 2 to 3 years, accelerated by maybe 2 to 3 years also from what it would have been without the collapse. And that's going to leave Milwaukee probably with only one regional mall when it's all said and done. I'm going to return back to the regular screen.
All right. Nice.
Somehow we got that done.
Yeah. So stop share your screen. You hit on the bottom. There's a little screen icon. Yep, there you go. All right. You gotta love technology. We've had everything possible happen.
Well, I want to tell you something. I've done several dozen of these. That's the first time I had a power outage in the middle of one.
Oh my gosh, that was this is the world we live in right now, right? So you left us a great segue for the Milwaukee malls. And I want to invite everyone who has questions on here to put them in the chat function, or you can text me. That's what people have been doing all day. If you have questions for Nick, he is familiar again with the Milwaukee market, but also a national, mostly a national expert on retail. So you talk about the malls in Milwaukee. Tell me about which one you think is going to survive and why. And then what happens to the other ones?
So I went through it very quickly on the screen there, but basically in specialty retail, and we're talking about discretionary spending and spending your discretionary time, there's two ways to delight the customer. One is by having the best merchandise selection in a market, and the other is to have the best place, the coolest place to be, the best feeling place in a market. I would argue that in Milwaukee, the coolest place is very quickly becoming the Third Ward. But the best merchandise selection still remains at Mayfair, and it's really the only one that has a shot of maintaining, at least in the near term future, dominance in the retail selection. So now, having said that, that doesn't mean it's going to get out unscathed. A malls all across the country have big problems ahead. Some of them, like mine right here in my own hometown of Annapolis, Maryland, have lost a Nordstrom. We had a Nordstrom, a Lord & Taylor, and 3 other department stores 4 years ago. We're down to 1 department store 4 years later, an A minus, B plus mall that lost 4 out of 5 department stores. We're going to see Nordstrom contracting. We may even see a Nordstrom bankruptcy. We're going to see all the other retailers either going away or contracting. I think the most likely one to contract further is Macy's. And I think we're going to see them contract by 3/4 before it's over. And so malls like Mayfair are going to have a lot of extra square footage, and they're going to have some pathways that don't really work going forward. So they're going to require on average that an A plus mall going forward, or an A mall going forward, may require as much as $1 billion, $1.5 billion of additional new investment over the next 10 to 15 years. So it's not a slam dunk, but in order for it to maintain its status as having the best retail selection as it loses department stores, it's going to have to repurpose in some ways. And then it's going to have to fight off whatever competition comes. We don't know what competition may come in the future, but other places may become much more desirable over time.
So you mentioned that malls will go away and the department stores are going to go away, or they're going to have to find ways to repurpose that space. What has to be done with them? Can you describe, number one, what is going to happen as the malls kind of go away or lose some of their GLA?
Yeah.
Number one. And number two, malls that are just malls and so well positioned to be a mall, what are they going to be doing to keep that vibrancy?
So let's put these malls into 4 categories. And you probably have one of each of these in the Milwaukee market or near the Milwaukee market. We have the A+ malls. I don't think you have an A+ mall because I don't think Mayfair is the equivalent of like an Oak Brook or Tyson's Corner. Okay. But you have an A mall, and that mall needs a ton of capital, as we just talked about, right? We then go to the kind of B malls, B+ malls, not the B- malls, but the B+ malls. These are malls like my Annapolis Mall that it's got Apple. It's got the largest Pottery Barn in the country in it, but it probably has to contract by 50% of its square footage going forward. There really is no other place in Annapolis to have the Apple Store and the Pottery Barn and the Crate and Barrel and all that's there, but it's got to considerably contract. So there's a whole lot of capital that's going to need to be spent to reorganize that site. That's category number 2. But the more interesting ones to me are category number 3 and 4. Category number 3 is those malls that have already kind of been washed out of the system and they're owned by liquidators. And in that case, those liquidators are going to do whatever's in their best financial interest. Those of you who are familiar with names like Namdar, and some of the others that buy these to liquidate them, they basically sell them for their parts. They're like a junkyard for malls. And then the most interesting of all, we think that somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 regional malls in the United States will exit productive life over the next 3 to 5 years, and they will not return to retail use. They will go to other uses. And this may be the best time in the history of real estate in America for those types of sites, because they don't have retail use going forward. So their prices are going to plummet. They're going to be victims of the collision between the REIT structure and the CMBS mortgage structure. So they're going to exit very unceremoniously. You might not even notice them exiting as ownership is transferred from the mall company that owns it now, which is likely a REIT, over to the special servicer that is the statutory kind of guardian of the real estate once it's not paying its mortgage. And then that's going to be sold at a fire sale. We're seeing some of these malls sell for under $10 million. We have one in my area that was a Taubman Mall that sold 3 weeks ago for $1.7 million for 100 acres of land. You're also going to see the lowest cost in history for unwinding the reciprocal easements that go with these, the lowest value of the real estate owned by the department stores or third parties that bought that real estate from department stores, and finally, the highest incentives in history for the local communities to work with the new owners to repurpose that real estate. And let's not forget, these are great real estate sites. They might not be great malls anymore, but they tend to be at great traffic intersections and great spots in cities. So, and they have utilities. So you have an average 100-acre site with utilities at a great location, just no longer usable for retail. And up till now, it's been too expensive to repurpose it. And all of a sudden now you can repurpose it at a reasonable cost. We think this could be one of the greatest real estate bonanzas in the last 100 years. And for certain cities, it can be a great economic moment for them because you can attract all kinds of new businesses. You can build mixed use properties, transit centers, housing. You can do all kinds of things with these great 100-acre sites. So this is an amazing moment. For those of us who are retail centric, we're saying bye-bye to something that's been our bread and butter for so long. But for those of us who are really just about real estate, it's a wonderful opportunity. And then when you add all that up, you end up with 15% of the malls that are left, and only ones that will be left are those that are best-in-class merchandise in their cities, some of which were A+ malls and some of which are A- malls like my Annapolis that are resized. But billions of dollars of capital to do that.
So do you see any wholesale conversions of certain owners, like a whether it was the old Boston stores or JCPenney's, in terms of just selling the whole portfolio and converting them into another user?
There's certainly going to be attempts at that, and there have been attempts at that. Everything from churches to gyms. We've also heard about Amazon. lots of different potentials. I will tell you that most of those will be flash in the pans, and those that, if any of them get done, they probably won't last very long. And here's why: the department store buildings are very much one-purpose buildings. A department store building is not well designed for Amazon distribution. It's not well designed for church. It's not well designed. You think about all the things it is designed for. It's not designed for almost anything. That's a different type of use. So whether it's distribution, office, or residential, in most cases, the best thing to do is going to be to take it down. And at the values we're talking about, there's really no need to try to salvage it for unnatural uses. It's probably better to take it down and start over.
Well, and like you mentioned, these are in such great locations. We have a question here about generations. I've heard that Gen Z is getting back into the mall. Do you think that there's anything to that?
I don't. So there's been a lot of talk about everything from the demise of the baby boomers as they age. When I say the demise of baby boomers as shoppers, to the differences between baby boomers and millennials, and then all those in between. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the behavior of these different generations, they behave differently, partly because of technology and partly because of their economic circumstances, and partly because of advances in medical technology that's making us live longer. So, for example, the average baby boomer had children at 22 years old. The average millennial is not having children until 35 years old. We don't really know how the millennials are going to act, but here's what we do know. We do know that the form of the regional mall, the planning of it, the dumbbell nature of it, the ring road around it with a big parking lot, the need to get out of your car and commit to go into the mall, that is no longer an efficient shopping method in the United States. It is still in other parts of the world that have much less retail than we do, but it is not the most efficient way to shop. Now, the only thing that could change that is if we have a change in automobile technology and road technology where we abandon our cars or simply don't have the mobility we have now. But as long as we have the kind of mobility we have right now and the road system we have right now, those are no longer, those are obsolete sites for all intents and purposes. I don't see anybody going back to them just because they're shopping differently. It's still not the most efficient way to shop going forward.
So you mentioned going back to kind of that first question on the malls, what needs to happen to malls, and you mentioned a ton of money. We don't know where this money is going to come from, obviously investors and people who see a vision for it. But in our community in Milwaukee, we've talked a lot about Bayshore. It's a mall that was an enclosed mall, now an open air mall. Now they're converting a lot of that to housing and office. Can you speak to that as a viable model in terms of a good return and usage for the real estate?
I shopped at so I was a law clerk in Milwaukee in 1981. Worked at what was then called the First Wisconsin Building. I think it's the USA Bank Building today. I lived in Shorewood, and I shopped at that old center all the time. I think there was an old Kohl's and an old grocery store in there and some other things. And we've seen it evolve. I think Steiner came in and changed it from one of the early obsolete enclosed malls into what you see now. The reason the retail hasn't worked as well as people thought there is because the trade area isn't large enough. As specialty shopping patterns have changed, and Mayfair being the dominant mall in the city, when you start to just look at raw trade areas, there aren't enough affluent people to do enough shopping there to support it. So, but what there is the main north-south interstate running through the most affluent communities in the market there. So yes, housing, office, all kinds of uses are possible there, and a smaller retail footprint and a non-regional footprint is probably where it will end up.
We saw a lot of evolution in the area of entertainment and an entertainment usage, whether it was attached to a mall. In fact, I think last year or 2 years ago, you were with us moderating a panel on kind of entertainment retail. Let's get people together, and
Yep.
and that's a great model. How do you see some of those evolving as it pertains to malls? Because a lot of those malls were repurposing space in that area. Are these going to go away, and we're going to have to watch this space repurpose itself once again?
No, I don't think it's going to go away. And one of the great experiments in the country, obviously, is we've all read about the American Dream Mall that's going to be reopening next month, or opening its retail for the first time, reopening its entertainment, but opening its full operations for the first time next month in New Jersey, and it's got 1.5 million square feet of retail and they of entertainment, and they say they're going up to almost 2 million square feet of entertainment. Look, it's hard to imagine entertainment of that type. A theme park, a communal water park, a communal skiing slope, a communal ice skating rink, and lots of other entertainment in there. It's hard to imagine that in all the restaurants in the condition we're in today, right? But we'll exit this condition at some point. I don't know if it'll be next year or the year after when everybody feels comfortable and this is a memory, but it will become a memory at some point. And if I'm like most people, I'm pretty sick of being home and pretty sick of doing Zoom stuff where the technology doesn't work sometimes, right? So we want to. We are social beings. So entertainment and restaurants, particularly, are a huge part of specialty retail going forward. But listen, before this, you rarely saw restaurants that wanted to locate inside of a mall. They always wanted to attach to the outside of the mall. The future of this is to make these places much more organic, where the experience is everything from A to Z when you're inside the mall. So I see that coming back, but slowly and with a lot of damage caused between now and then. And watch what happens with 555, and not only American Dream, but of course they own Mall of America, they own Edmonton, and then we have another one that's like them up in Syracuse, Destiny USA. Let's see what happens to them over time. All of them have mortgages that are in some form of distress right now. And in the case of 555, they've got cross defaults on their 3 mega malls totaling almost 15 million square feet. And they're in cross default problems right now with their lenders on all of them.
How are you seeing those mall owners, the landlords, work to preserve the tenants or preserve that asset? I mean, we saw with JCPenney, Simon purchased JCPenney. What are some of the other things that the malls are doing? I know some of the malls, the stores aren't even open. I think we have a few at Mayfair, one of our largest malls. It's the Apple store wasn't open as of a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, this is a real problem, and what you're seeing are short-term remedies to long-term problems. There are many reasons why different retailers are going through bankruptcy, and why the malls particularly have been hit the hardest. But the most obvious reason is because the mall is anchored by the department stores, which were the weakest financially going into this, particularly the full line department store legacy ones like JCPenney, and what's left of Sears. There's very little left, but also Macy's. And also their inline fashion retailers. I had to go through this very quickly, but they're two-season retailers. They're high-low price two-season retailers. Sometimes in the same environment with Zara and H&M sitting right next to them. And when you have that kind of a situation, you've got winners and losers. So you have a lot of losers in the fashion portion of the regional mall structure. They're probably not going to come back no matter what kind of investment they get. JCPenney's not going to be around. This is an organized liquidation at JCPenney. Many of the JCPenney stores will never open. Those that do open in Simon and Brookfield and other properties will open, but they'll open only as long as they need to while they transition to future uses. They're going to try to avoid cross defaults as much as they can, but they're in cross default hell right now anyway. And ultimately, they're going to want to control the real estate in their best locations. The real estate that's in all these 400 or 500 C and D malls that are going to be liquidated, it's almost worthless now anyway, because it's not really going to be valued as retail real estate going forward. So it's really only valuable as part of a larger redevelopment. So you're talking about, again, billions of dollars of reinvestment, and probably smaller formats when it's all said and done. Even when you take the native internet brands that have been coming out of the internet and into brick and mortar, they don't really want that type of environment. And even if they do, they're relatively small format retailers. So the days of these large 10, 15,000 foot stores that so much of a part of our past, or even 5,000 foot stores with the Gap and Banana Republic and so forth. I mean, they're really over. So these malls are going to have to get smaller. They're going to have to generate traffic differently, because they may only have one, or in very select cases, 2 department stores. I mean, this is the future. And ultimately, they're going to have to be the best in class merchandise and offer some entertainment. That means they really have to be reworked almost from scratch. The mall structure is a terrible structure for that. The mall structure is equivalent to running a bond fund. It's a higher yield bond fund, essentially. They're competing for yield with lower risk investments. So if you own a REIT, you own a bond fund. And if you're in a business that requires a lot of capital and is undergoing rapid change, that is an incredibly poor format for a bond because bonds require stability. Obviously, now they had a higher yield than 10-year T-bills because they're higher risk, but the risk has gone up exponentially. So I think the REIT form is an impediment to this. I think they're going to have to come up with other structures. They're going to have to ground lease and get partners in who can apply capital through a different structure. And ultimately, they may have to abandon the REIT form before it's all over. And while I probably would be a buyer of REITs like Acadia that own high street retail that's been really beaten down during this, I would not be buying any a mall REIT going forward. This is a contracting industry, and it's a contracting industry that's going to require billions in capital, and I'm running from that.
All right. Well, switching forward to things that you would run to, we do have a question about the future for lifestyle centers. Now, I know they're not malls, but they still, providing some sort of retail format because and not everything is going to be purchased on the internet. So what do you see for the future of that and more mixed use residential niche retail type formats?
So I went through it very fast, but you may have noticed that when I covered the various forms of retail that will survive in the specialty retail part of the business, which is the smaller part of the business, I did not use the term lifestyle center. I used the term open air centers. The reason I don't use lifestyle centers is because I don't know what it means, and I don't think anybody knows what it means at this point. I think we lump into it all of the centers that were generally open air in which higher end tenants were in them. But, within that group were everything from the kind of things that Forest City built, which were malls without roofs, all the way to the kind of things that Red Property built, which, were smaller open air centers, sometimes two-sided streets, sometimes not, with better tenants in them. So I think the issue is not so much the lifestyle center. And by the way, the closest thing you have to that would be essentially Bayshore. Bayshore was pretty much turned into a two-sided street lifestyle center with mixed uses. So they're not going anywhere. They're going to be around. I think that the format they're going to take going forward is going to be more mixed use. I think they're going to have less retail in general. But the problem with them all along was that nobody really understood what they were. Nobody understood the trade areas. They had a huge failure rate. Like 75% of the initial developers lost those properties at some point. They usually came back to a second or even a third buyer who corrected them. And in many cases, they weren't even corrected well then. The reason is because all of the technology that we used to do malls in the old days, all of the research technology doesn't work well with lifestyle centers. And so the trade areas are often misunderstood. So we're going to have a new generation that understands trade areas better and understands mix of uses better and probably has less retail. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be some that are dominant. One of the greatest centers in the country is an open air center that was developed in Seattle near the University of Washington called University Center. And it's in its seventh round of densification from what once was a grocery store and hardware store. Same thing in Columbus, Ohio, with Easton Town Center, which was built by a combination of Les Wexner and Steiner. Now is essentially the dominant specialty retail property with department stores. It's basically a mall without a roof at this point. So, they're all over the board. There was some that will be surviving essentially as A or A plus malls, small number. There were many others that will survive as mixed use, and there are a small number that will survive just as great, incredibly well curated properties that were done mostly by great entrepreneurs, not by REITs. And then we're talking about the University Town Center, the Caruso's project, the Grove in Los Angeles, of course, Kansas City, not owned by local people anymore, owned by REITs now, not as exciting as it once was, but of course, the Plaza in Kansas City, all examples of great specialty retail developed by passionate regional developers.
And you say that we will have 200 or fewer malls when this is over.
I think we're headed to 150 when it's all said and done. Some of my research partners go as high as 250. Some actually go a little bit lower. I mean, if you look at that chart I showed earlier of the owners of regional malls, I mean, you're only talking about the big four, I think, own a total of 250 malls right now. Maybe it's 300 when you add up Simon and Macerich, Brookfield, and Uniball Rodamco, Westfield. I think they only own 250 or 300 malls between them, and they're shedding malls. I think that in the last 6 months, rumors have had Brookfield putting as many as 60 malls into special servicing now or in the near future. So that, that's that program I showed you where the REIT structure immediately conflicts with the CMBS structure, and they're going to exit very quietly. You're not even going to see them exit. So I'd be betting on 150 or fewer when the dust fully settles. That may take another 10 years, but that's where we're going.
Got it. How about activation of malls? How important is that? It kind of goes to that entertainment piece, but what you're seeing, as an example at whether it's Bayshore or other malls that are outdoor or even indoor, we're going to have a movie night, or they have a big screen, or they have just gathering of people. How important is that? Is that going to work, or is there something else? Is that the first step to something else?
So Tracy, you're asking great questions. That's a really good question.
Somebody else asked it, Carolyn.
Well, whoever asked, that's a really good question. In the continuum of specialty centers, there are three things that define them. The merchandising mix. That's what I was talking about in the A malls, having the best in class merchandising mix. But then the place. How many people have been to Disneyland, Disney World, right? Disney World is 100% retail property, other than the attractions that are in there, right? You buy stuff all day long at Disney World, at the Magic Kingdom. That's all you do is buy things. And you don't buy high quality, you pay high prices, and you wait in line to do it, right? But you do it because the place is extraordinary, and you pay to park, you pay to get in. So that shows you the potential of place. You build a great place and people will go just because it's perceived as a great place to be. And then the third thing is activation. And by activation, we mean not only what events are you having and how you promote, but what type of a place are you making for the people who use your facility and how do they use it? So, I get clients all the time who say, I threw an event this weekend and I had 25,000 people and our sales went down. Well, of course they went down because you threw an event for Model T car owners and they're not interested in buying, stuff at Ann Taylor. And the people who shop at Ann Taylor normally don't like to come when there's 25,000 Model T car owners there. So it's perfecting the mix of place, great shops, and activation. And activation is one of the big three. Activation can be as important as who the shops are. Why do you think Disney, even with that great place, has the parade once a day that goes down the middle of the place, right? That's activation. So of course, and as retail people, we're not that good at that. It's really not. You didn't really have to activate a mall. You had to. What you have to do? You have to have the bunny at Easter and Santa at Christmas, and occasional performances by the local high school marching band. I mean, this is a whole different world we're talking now, where you're talking about how people spend their very precious discretionary time. So yes, that's a huge part of it going forward. And as the retail mixes get smaller, even more important that the place be relevant. But you can't just do it by throwing an event that brings 25,000 Model T car owners into your mall or 25,000 knitting people or whatever, Yeah,
well, that's a fascinating point because it would speak to then what your retail mix is. It has to be so specific to your community. And then how do you monetize that? You have a band there or you have a big screen there, or just like Disney, are you going to charge admission to come?
Well, maybe you're not going to charge admission, but maybe you're going to use technology to offer incentives to people who are there for certain shops that want to take advantage of it. Maybe you're going to gather the names of those people and you're going to market to those people on a regular basis. Maybe you're going to geofence and sell the list to other people. I mean, there's so many different ways. If you're not embracing technology, and I didn't even mention 5G. I mean, 5G can change. You can have virtual events going on in the place with 5G. So if you are in the specialty retail business and you're not embracing technology, you are way behind already.
Well, we are going to wrap with one final question, and I always like to end on a high note. And that is, I mean, we saw a lot, we heard a lot about the accelerated demise of malls, but looking forward, is there anything that you're optimistic about or any piece of advice that you would give to our attendees today?
Well, first of all, I'm not pessimistic on malls. Malls have gone through their life cycle. So we're real estate people, right? how delighted can we be that we have hundreds of 100-acre sites coming back on the market, many of which will have retail components to them that will be modern retail. I am extraordinarily optimistic about all aspects of commodity retail. I'm extraordinarily optimistic about all aspects of brick and mortar retail, because internet is never going to be more than 17, 18%. And after 25 years, it was only at 11% before the pandemic. So Americans are going to shop in brick and mortar forever. And so the only real piece of it that's not positive, if you are a current owner, is the mall portion of it. But everything from mixed use to greater sophistication, getting more out. We're going to see utilization of real estate go way up as the amount of square footage goes down from the record number. We have 24.5 square feet per capita before the pandemic. The rest of the world average is 5 feet per capita. So we're going to bring our retail real estate world in the United States into a much more efficient world. It's a much more efficient business requiring all kinds of new skills. And I think it's a great industry for people to be in. Let's not forget, it's a $5.33 trillion at retail business. If you count the suppliers, the construction, the trucking, and all of it, it's 65 or 70% of every dollar spent in America goes somewhere to retail. So the idea that there's a negative outlook, no, not at all. We're just washing out an obsolete form. You think GM doesn't build new plants to make other plants obsolete?
I think that's a great point. And to say, who doesn't want all this new real estate, well-positioned real estate, in great sites? Who's not excited to have that available to work with?
I think it's one of the great opportunities, like I said, in the history of modern real estate in the United States. Certainly in the last 100 years, you look for an opportunity when that many great sites came on the market with utilities, with barriers lowered from what they were, with communities that want to work with you.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Nick. And I think we had a great conversation, and I always enjoy working with you.